This is PTV World. I am SYED SHABAHAT and you are watching Faultlines. Today we are going to discuss one of the most remarkable organizations, militant organizations of our contemporary times, ISIS or Daesh. This organization has got many names: ISIL, ISIK, Daesh, and the list goes on. But collectively, all of these names have spread terror and fear on a remarkable extent. Not only it remained a state back in 2014, but also became an ideologue for many people and successfully recruited terrorists from over 100 nations. Yes, ISIS was once having manpower consisting of people carrying Canadian, British, American, and many other passports. ISIS that initially started from Iraq and Syria is now spreading the filth of its venom in many other parts of the world, one of which is Africa. Today, we will see how Daesh is spreading in all these parts of the world. Team Faultlines have prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
World faces the prospect of revived security threat from transnational terror group Islamic State. The emergence of ISIL, the umbrella organization that includes ISKP, has often been attributed to sectarian dynamics, but the armed group has bloody legacy of stoking violence indiscriminately. ISIL was formed by defectors from Al-Qaeda in 2014 in Syria, who then attacked their parent organization in its Syrian affiliate Jabhat al-Nusra, while ISKP was formed primarily by defectors from the Taliban in both Afghanistan and Pakistan in 2015, who then went on to attack the Afghan branch. Islamic State Khorasan's transition into a trans-regional threat poses additional danger, and evidence suggests that ISKP's tentacles have begun spreading across West, Central and South Asia. Early in 2022, ISKP warned of a new era of global jihad in the following months. It not only expanded its operation across the Amu Darya in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, but it also targeted the Russian embassy in Kabul and then claimed responsibility of attack on Pakistan embassy in Kabul. In 2018, more than 80% of Islamic State's activity was concentrated in Iraq and Syria. Now the majority of its attacks are staged in Africa. Islamic State extremists dominate vast regions of central Mali, northern Burkina Faso and Niger, with attacks reaching as far as Benin and Togo. In assessing the potential of ISIS, the need is to acknowledge that the organization is not an insurgency seeking territorial gains, but it's steadfast in its determination to proliferate its ideological, strategic and tactical reach to the entire world.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short break before we discuss this topic with the first guest of the program. Stay tuned. To join me in this part of my program, my first guest is Mr. Ahmed Zaki. He's a famous Middle Eastern expert, also an expert on African affairs, and frequently appears on my show. Zaki, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We're talking about the menace of ISIS or Daesh or ISIL. They have multiple names. A recent name is ISIK, all originating from one foundation organization. But I want to start this conversation from you because it has been heard that this organization is penetrating now in various parts of Africa. What's your quick feedback on that?
As you know that Central Africa, Eastern Africa and even Western Africa, now the terrorist organization is with various different names and various different agenda. They are spreading all across Africa. Now I can say that there is no state in Africa that have not been affected, whether they are rich or poor. They have different level of effect. When you see that the East African countries and Central African countries, they are most affected one, like from Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda. That's one side affected by Al-Shabaab.
We come to that side of the list of the countries, but generally speaking, what do you believe can be the reason that organizations like Daesh are finding warm breeding grounds in the landscape of Africa? Generally, what can be the reason for that?
There are two reasons. Number one is that the state institutions in Africa are not that capable to control all of their land. That's number one. And number two, the corruption level of the African states where there is no democratic transition of the government is dictatorship. The people are already feeling that they have been overpowered by the government. They without listening their demands. So they have some sort of sympathy from the African people. So in the beginning, they are getting support from the local people because they are against their own state, our governments. On the other side, the poverty and the food shortage in African states are also participating in this type of expansion.
Zaki, banking on your knowledge about the different countries of Africa, would it be fine if we go through the list of the countries that are affected?
Obviously.
So the first country that comes to my mind is Nigeria. Now tell how Nigeria is affected with...
Nigeria is the hotbed of the terrorists currently. Boko Haram is the most powerful and largest terror organization in Africa. They are attacking the schools. They are abducting 400, 200 girls. With all the international media and international forces can watch it without any assistance. They feel helpless, the people of Nigeria.
But is it got something to do with Daesh, or you're generally speaking about the terrorists?
Definitely, Daesh is a new form of Al-Qaeda in Africa, or what we call it. They have all in same category of they are fighting in the name of...
But Boko Haram, is it also related with Daesh?
Definitely. It's the mother of Daesh in Africa.
All right. Now let's talk about Somalia, a country that is most affected, one of the most affected countries.
Yeah.
You being an expert on Somalia's affairs, I think you have a background from there as well. Tell us how militancy is affecting Somalia.
Militancies in Somalia, they are Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda related, the largest Al-Qaeda affiliated branch in the world. It's called Al-Shabaab. And they are operating all East Africa, not only Somalia. Somalia is their main hub. Currently, they were reducing their activities, but still you can see their influence exist in the capital city and some southern and central part of Somalia. And that is how Al-Shabaab, by spreading fear and terror, they are still showing their existence by attacking like last week attack on the hotels. They are attacking hotels. They are attacking public gathering, government offices. Sometimes they are attacking the...
and all these attacks are melting down the capacity of the state to fight with them.
Obviously, state is somehow trying their level best to counter-attack the terrorists. The problem is that they are still under the section of the weapon industry. So they cannot purchase weapon from outside because government is still under the sanction.
Support.
They don't have enough equipment to fight Al-Shabaab.
Now let's talk about another country that is trying to grapple with the situation in hand, made because of organizations like Al-Qaeda, and it's Mali. So how Mali is affected by this problem?
The nature of Mali and the terrorist organizations are quite different from the rest of African countries. And Mali is quite a large land in central part of Africa, with the Central Republic of Africa and Ivory Coast. It is quite near to Burkina Faso. All are nearby to each other. They built a new form of a terrorism organization, which they call an alliance, a desert alliance. They created an African and Arab, mixed African and Arab army, which they call it they are fighting for jihad. Absolutely, their way of abducting, the way they were of attacking the government is also different from the other parts.
But are these offshoots of Al-Qaeda or offshoots of Daesh, or these are the organizations inspired by Daesh or Al-Qaeda?
In Daesh in Africa now, they are getting the revival of the previous Al-Qaeda movement in Africa. The Al-Qaeda movement in Africa after the counter-attacks or a lot of sanctions, they felt quite losing in power in the ground. So this new form of the gathering new power, or the reviving form of is called Daesh. Otherwise, they are the teacher and their student. All the way they are almost the same.
And also Kenya is one of the countries that are badly affected.
Kenya is affected. Kenya somehow is the only East African state maintaining the democracy. When you see in East African states, the only state maintained the democracy since their independence. And Kenya is the second home of the United Nations organizations UN organizations. So it's the hub of the international, or what we call the Western tourism in Africa. And it's right next to the hotbed of Al-Shabaab Somalia. So where Al-Shabaab sees opportunity to attack Kenya, they are attacking malls, as we have seen Westgate in Nairobi. They are attacking universities, as we have seen Garissa University. They are attacking also those who are traveling through the land. So sometimes they are even abducting the foreigners from there. So that is how Kenya felt helpless against Al-Shabaab, and they sent their army into Somalia for the support of the federal government to counterattack.
In a preemptive strike that they go and attack inside. But I understand comparatively Kenya is a richer economy, but they are even available or present in countries as bad as Ethiopia. I mean, a country that is so badly entangled in all these food crises and civil war, you know, parties fighting with the state fighting with parties, using aeroplanes, drones and whatnot. And you find these organizations working in Ethiopia as well.
Ethiopia, since the new administration came, Ethiopia is the second largest populated in Africa after Nigeria. So they were also the second largest growing economy in Africa, just after Nigeria. So you can understand that they were growing very fast.
But
they have enough population.
It has halted.
And now, after when they see that the new administration is crossing the status quo administration, the previous administration's legacy, they start creating a section war, like the tribal war or the nationalist war, and that gives access to the terrorist organizations that they can infiltrate and take the opportunity of the conflict.
Similar problem prevails in Uganda as well.
Uganda is because of the dictatorship. People are tired about the dictatorship. And those who are against the tribalists who are against the government, either they are getting support from the Al-Qaeda organization linked related, or they are getting from the militants who want to overtake the government. So all is related to the government organizations are not properly addressing the problem of their own nation.
So less Kenya and Ethiopia, in most of the cases, they're fighting with the state, and the state is not prepared for it. In case of Ethiopia, we have found out that the government is very heavily equipped, and also in Kenya, the government has a lot of resources to fight them out. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Now, let's talk about Algeria, another African country that is stuck in this conflict cycle for quite long now.
Algeria is one of the, what I can say, it's called Islamic Jihad organization, and they are linked to the Central Asian Islamic Jihadists. They are one of the oldest Islamic movement. They are against the former ruler of Abdulaziz Bouteflika, who used to rule in Algeria for a long time. Their main reason is that they don't get even access to like normal practice of Islam, because the dictator was trying to embrace the Western culture into Algeria, and the Algerian people were already feeling that they have been undermined by their faith and their principle of Islam. So they were having like a lot of welcome inside the country. Then they reformed their form of fight through education, even through election. But unfortunately, when they didn't get any civilian response, they go and take war. And that's one of the most dangerous African terrorist organizations that you have ever come across.
So it is coming out of an indigenous, genuine desire of people for their liking of religion that has been capitalized by terrorist organizations.
But obviously, yes.
And we are also seeing the similar pattern started to sprawl inside a country as mighty as Egypt, one of the strongest partners of the West and one of the richest countries in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
and they are most, like economically, they are most stabilized country in Africa after South Africa. The Egypt form of terrorism is like they get influence from Hamas, which is right across the border of Palestine. when they see the Israeli occupation of Palestine, the Palestinian helplessness, they started campaigning inside Egypt. And Egypti people, they respond very quickly. And that was 1977 started. It started from the 70 Years' War. And after that, they grow slowly inside the country. They started frontier attack to Israel by themselves. And later
Which
on,
has gained momentum ever since Mohammed Morsi has been eliminated from the scene.
definitely. And after that, they get a lot of respect inside the Middle East, and even Saudi Arabia used to support in early stage of this.
And one last country that I would want to discuss from Africa is Sudan.
Sudan.
Another strong African country that is grappling with the crisis.
Definitely.
I'm talking about North Sudan at the moment.
Sudan is divided into three categories. One is the southern part of Sudan, which gets its independence.
We did the last program on that.
Newly got independent. On the other side of Sudan, they are tribal society, and tribal society, the Arab Africans and non-Arab Africans in Sudan. Those who are tribals in Darfur, they are fighting in the name of nationalism. They said, recognize our existence in the country, but with the help of Islamic jihadist movement. And that is how he present former President Omar Hassan al-Bashir in Sudan. He presented to the rest of the world that these people are not demanding legitimate demand of their nationalist interests. They are spreading terrorism. Even though, as we know, Osama bin Laden was based on Sudan. He invested a lot of projects in Sudan before he shifted to Afghanistan. But he never got influence in Sudan, because Sudani people in the central part of Sudan, they are most educated African society in Africa. Almost 90% of the people are educated. You can find that you cannot manipulate by religious ideology simply. But when you go to the Darfur area, that is where they get influence because of the local conflict. It's the interest of the people asking the state their legitimate demand, and the state is calling them terrorists.
All in all, we see a sprawling effect of militancy growing in Africa, and all of these countries are affected. Thank you very much, Ahmed Zaki, for being guest in today's program.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Ahmed Zaki was talking about the list of the American countries, he made us swiftly go through the list of the African countries that are facing the problem of ISIS and Daesh. Let's not forget that this crisis took birth from the land called Iraq and Syria. I mean, this is the region where ISIS has originally taken birth back in 2014. They declared a state for some time. So for some practical time, the state, some part of the state of Iraq went under control of ISIS, and then many international powers got involved into it, and ISIS eventually disintegrated from it. When and every time we talk about any issue related to Iraq, my favorite guest is Nasir Moeed, who originally is from Iraq and has a lot of insight of the subject. Let's ask from Nasir what is his insight of the subject. Nasir, welcome to the show once again.
Welcome, Brother Shafat.
Tell us once again from the start, I mean, how does Daesh or ISIS started from Iraq? Because one of the theories that I have read in many Western media outlets is that it was originally consisting of many people who escaped away from Saddam Hussein's army.
Well, ISIS started on the heritage of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who fought against the Americans since 2003. And then they built what's so-called the Anbar Islamic State. And after that collapsed, after the Americans' operations in Al-Anbar and all this region, then after in 2014, they started again, and they announced the Islamic State in Mosul by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Nasir, let me bring my original question back. I mean, thank you very much for giving this background. But originally, I wanted to understand is it correct that most of the recruits in the ISIS were the people running away from Saddam Hussein's army who were angry about Iraqis army being disintegrated and wanted to get back to action. Is that right?
Well, some observers see that ISIS is actually leadership is from two levels. One level is the highest governing members of ISIS, and they are mostly experts. They are ex-Iraqi army leaders, and they have experience in military and in governing as well. The other level, which is the field management or the operational authorities, and they have no previous connections, no previous experiences in Iraq or Syria. They are normal people, just ranked in the positions
So Nasir,
of
if I
ISIS
understood you
and
correctly,
hierarchy of
Nasir, this means
ISIS.
that the leadership certainly came from the former soldiers of Iraqi army, but the recruits or the fighters on ground were actually coming from all over the world, inspired by the idea of caliphate's establishment.
Yes, it's like that, and that leadership, as I told you, one leadership have had very deep roots in the Iraqi military and in the Iraqi regime, previous regime, and also in the same in Syria as well. And the second level, they are mostly religious people, religious leaders, and normal people who got good ranks in in the hierarchy of the organization.
So let's move forward, Nasir. For Iraq, I think if we look into last 20 years of Iraq's fall down or Iraq's destruction, I believe there are majorly two phases of it. One is the wrath that Iraq had to face by NATO allies led by United States. A war started on wrong grounds, for which later many clarifications also came up, which caused a lot of damage for Iraq's infrastructure. And the second wrath was coming from ISIS, that has done a lot of assassinations, has destroyed infrastructure of many cities. If you compare the damages done by United States and allies, done by ISIS to the beautiful country called Iraq, which party has brought more miseries to the people of Iraq?
Well, no doubt the big powers are big powers. Nothing compared to the destruction America's brought. But on the other hand, ISIS justified all the destruction, all the killing happened, all the fights between the Shias and Sunnis, the fights between the different militias and tribes in Iraq, that brought also a lot of destruction in Iraq, and many cities were 100% collapsed, like the city of Mosul, the city of Fallujah. They were destructed 100%, like 100% of the buildings, the houses were on ground. The people were just took refuge to other cities or other countries as well. So that brought a lot of victims, a lot of destruction to
Nasir,
the country.
would you give due credit to the leadership of ISIS that by the virtue of using the attractive idea of installing caliphate, they started attracting people, young Muslim people from many countries, and that includes, like I said in the beginning, from countries like Canada, United States, Germany, England. People were coming from all of these places. So is it because purely of the fact that the idea of caliphate was very attractive and was nicely propagated and propelled by the leadership of Daesh?
Well, as I mentioned before, that the upper level of the leadership of ISIS were experts, and they had already connections and networks all around the world with not only people, but with governments, with intelligence agencies, and with the militaries. There was a big game happening in behind, and yes, a lot of people joined. Some of them joined with agendas. Some people joined just for some Islamic emotions, but that brought a lot of destruction to the country and to the region.
Nazir Moeed, later this problem also had its spillover effect to many other Middle Eastern countries. We know that there are countries that got affected because of the problem that originally started from Iraq and Syria. How far do you agree with that?
Yes, it spread to many other countries in Egypt, in the Sinai region of Egypt, in Libya, in Middle Africa, Nigeria, North Nigeria, in Yemen, in some East Asian countries, in many countries in the world.
And in your opinion, what caused the wrap up of ISIS from Iraq and Syria? There are many theories to it. There are many people who believe that some international powers actually made sure that ISIS gets disintegrated. But you being a local from Iraq, tell us what is, in your opinion, the major reason of disintegration of ISIS, which at some point was looking to be the most formidable, powerful force that existed in this entire region.
Well, Daesh is still alive. It's very weak now. After the killing of the first leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the second and third leaders, they were not as popular as the first leader. The organization became quite weak in Iraq and Syria. There were a lot of operations against it from especially from the Americans. They were eliminated, and they are now in some area in between on the borders of Iraq and Syria, around 40 to 60 kilometers long. They are kept there for reasons, so they might be used in future. The organization became so weak. They have around only 500 members now. We remember when they entered Mosul, they reached to 20,000 members, but now they became only 500 members. But even 500 members are still there, and they are kept alive. They are kept active for many reasons.
I was expecting you to give due credit to Iran and Hezbollah, who have fought ferociously, particularly to defend some parts of Iraq that were of religious significance for both these sides. But you have given credit to many other parties, but the two that I just listed.
They fought against ISIS, no doubt. The Iranians and Hezbollah, and also the militias in Iraq, the army of Iraq, they all fought against ISIS. But the whole game is not clear till now. Many observers, they see that the political game and the influence of ISIS was not only to the region where they were in control, but also they had links with the neighboring countries as well, and they had a lot of mutual interest as well. We don't forget that ISIS used to sell the oil to the neighboring countries. So how comes that they are fighting against ISIS, and at the same time they are cooperating with them to sell the oil?
Thank you very much, Nazir Moeed, for being a guest in our program. Ladies and gentlemen, as you heard in the end, there were two important points that he highlighted. One is the integration of oil business into the problem of terrorism. That actually creates a black economy, that actually attracts a lot of criticism for everywhere else. And the other thing is that from Iraq and Syria, where they originally existed in such a strong strength, now ISIS or Daesh, that at some point had a registered manpower of 30,000 fighters fighting in just one city of Mosul, are now not more than 500 people. Not that they have all been beaten, not that all have been killed, not that all have run away, but they have splintered in many other subgroups. And as Ahmed Zaki said in the first part of program, that the problem has now gone toward many parts of Africa that serve as warm breeding grounds and nurseries for militant organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Ladies and gentlemen, since we in the South Asia are also one of the worst affectees of the problem of terrorism, I have now invited another guest in the show, Syed Khalid Muhammad, who is Director General of a think tank called Command 11. Joining me on video link from SWAT, and he's going to tell us about the regional implications of the phenomena of Daesh in the region. Khalid bhai, welcome to the show. And my first question is how ISIS took birth in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is geographically far away from the region that they were originally operating from. Certainly Iran serves as a barrier between Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, and all of a sudden we started seeing the shootout of ISIS in Afghanistan. How did that happen? Can you briefly tell us about it?
When you talk about the birth of the Islamic State in Afghanistan, you need to understand that even though the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq announced in 2015 that they were expanding into Afghanistan, we didn't actually see any signs of advancement. It was 2016 July when ISKP, Islamic State Khorasan Province, the flavor of the region, that they finally launched their first attack and attacked a peaceful protest of Shia Hazaras. 80 were killed, 230 were injured, and that was the first step that we saw ISIS introduce itself. At the time of the attack, ISKP had already secured footing in 4 districts of Nangarhar province in eastern Afghanistan along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. But we have to understand that while most of the Islamic State leadership in Afghanistan that came out in Nangarhar province were Pakistani militants who had long been settled in Afghanistan, in the Spingar mountain areas bordering the Pakistani Fatah region. While many people think that the Islamic State moved into Afghanistan because of the fight against the Americans, I think we need to be more intelligent in understanding why the Islamic State moved into Afghanistan. First off, of course, there's a direct conflict with the U.S. military inside of Afghanistan. Secondly, there was the potential to become a counterforce to the Taliban in Afghanistan. Many people at the time when ISIS announced their step into Afghanistan, many people believed that the Taliban would not allow them to expand, would not allow them to operate. That was the case. The Taliban was very quick in bashing these people, beating them over the heads. But you need to remember that those two things are very clear. Third, it also gives any foreign power, I'm not just going to say the Afghani government, any foreign power the ability to attack Pakistan directly, to orchestrate the ongoing insurgency that was going on in Afghanistan, and to take out a price on Pakistan if the Americans or any other state decide that Pakistan should be punished.
Brother Khalid, thank you very much for giving all this background, but I think we somehow have missed the presence of TTP, which is also a major phenomena in this region. Now, how does TTP gets factored into this conversation? Is it a rival organization, or do they have similarity of interest with Daesh in our region?
Well, here's the funny part. Many people would like to say that TTP and Daesh, these two seem very similar. They seem very different. The problem we have here is that most of the ISKP leadership that's in Afghanistan came from the TTP. So people that were upset with the TTP leadership, whether it be Baitullah Masood, Hakimullah Masood, or in the end Fazullah, they found safe haven with the ISKP. Understanding that most of these militant camps, these terrorist camps, were all based in 3 provinces along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Inside of Afghanistan, it was very easy to draw people from there. If you recall, I think it was 2017 that Ahmed Rashid was caught in Afghanistan by U.S. forces. The Afghanistan National Directorate of Security was extremely upset with the U.S. military because they had captured Ahmed Rashid. The reason they were angry is because Ahmed Rashid was one of their assets. And that's when this ball opened up as to how deep the power was against Pakistan. We also know that the Afghan government, prior to the TTP coming into its form, was heavily supporting Mangalbag's Lashkar-e-Islam. They also provide the TTP free movement, safe haven, and treatment in government hospitals. So when the Afghan government says that our soil will not be used for terrorist purposes or against any other country, it's very difficult on the Pakistan side not to chuckle, because we've seen what the Afghanis do. We've seen how honorable they are with their promises, and we don't expect anything different from them.
Coming back to the problem of Afghan Taliban, it's quite complicating to understand that while both of these parties, I mean Daesh and Afghan Taliban, at some point in time were fighting against the foreign invader called United States of America, why do now they scuffle with each other? What is the point in picking up weapons against each other and trying to cut each other out while both are militant organizations? As you have said, some of their people have been moving around. I've been joining one organization after another, as we joined one bank after serving in another bank. So what is the point for these two to fight with each other?
Yes, I agree. There are numerous differences between the Afghan Taliban and Islamic State Khorasan province. First off, you have to understand that the vision that leads both is very different. The Islamic State leadership believes that they lead all Muslims when there's any conflict in the region, whereas the Taliban believes they are the only legitimate opposition to the Western dominance in Afghanistan. When you look at those two pieces, it's very difficult to understand how these two could cooperate together. Understanding ideological beliefs are different, religious beliefs are different. It makes it very difficult for us to think that the Taliban and ISKP could ever become allies. The Taliban has also on numerous occasions warned ISKP that they are fomenting extremism and they are splitting up the ranks of the Mujahideen, which is also very true. We also have to keep in mind that Al-Qaeda has on numerous occasions renewed its oath of allegiance to the Taliban. For the Islamic State to spread across Afghanistan, they really need the Taliban to fall apart. And in the current model, it seems extremely unlikely the Taliban will become weakened and Islamic State Khorasan province will have a chance to spread across Afghanistan or to gain any kind of power in Afghanistan.
So if all of this is the scenario that you have just highlighted, it's again very confusing to understand that if Pakistan has become any party to this conflict going on between Afghan Taliban and Daesh, because Pakistan has got no business to do with Daesh. Pakistan does not even, as you have mentioned, not even fall in the agenda list that you have underlined so far. So how serious of a problem would Daesh be for a country like Pakistan?
When we talk about the risk to Pakistan, we have to understand that Pakistan is always at risk. There are many international intelligence agencies, there are many foreign groups that are interested in destabilizing Pakistan. That destabilization is due to wanting to make sure that Pakistan is weakened to such a point that they can take our nuclear assets. I think it was 2017 when there was an article written during the Zardari government that the best answer to Pakistan and their debt is to buy their nuclear assets and wipe out their debt. So the Americans have always been looking for a way to buy our nuclear weapons, weaken Pakistan, and put us in a position where we will not be able to defend ourselves against multiple fronts. Now, we understand the Indians are also involved in this because they were given very, very large swaths of land to work with inside of Afghanistan, whether it be from an economic point of view, whether it be from a supporting point of view for the Americans. Even though General Musharraf, while he was president, when the Twin Towers were attacked, one of the conditions that General Musharraf put down on the Americans in Pakistan cooperating was that India would not be given space inside of Afghanistan to operate. The Americans opened the door to the Indian government, said, "Come and do whatever you want." So there was a little problem there. The risk to Pakistan will only be understood if the TTP starts attacking inside of Pakistan again, as they announced last week, that they've given up the ceasefire and they will now start waging war against Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Syed Khalid, for being guest in our program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was our detailed segment about the risks of Daesh in this part of the world. We'll take a break and we'll join you back with the second segment of program. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As Russia and Ukraine's war is not over, there are serious developments that are taking place every week. And therefore, program Fault Lines, by the virtue of its design, cannot ignore the developments taking place. Now, this development that we are about to discuss is far more serious than all the developments that have taken place in the past. And the development is that Ukraine, for the first time, has attacked Russia 600 miles inside Russian territory. Yes. The attack was made evidently through some, or apparently through some drone that Ukraine has developed overnight and has hit with precision inside Russia's mainland on an airbase. This is a big leap because now the war has gone inside Russia, and the implications both for the politics and for the military of Russia are far-reaching with regard to this attack. Also, the fact that there are some gaps that have started to appear within the ranks of the European nations. President of France has given a statement while giving interview to The Economist magazine, wherein he said what we are currently experiencing is a brain death of NATO. This is one serious statement. To talk about this, I have invited a guest from Washington, D.C. His name is Gabriel Noronha. He is former advisor to State Department of United States. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Ali.
What are your remarks with regards to the attack that has taken place deep inside Russia? How concerning it is for you?
So the Ukrainian forces have developed long-range drones with the ability to strike deep within Russian territory. And over the last couple of days, they've been striking Air Force bases, destroying Russian bombers, which have been used to attack Ukrainian facilities and military installations. These attacks, I think, surprised Russia, the fact that they were able to go in so deep. I don't think it's a bad thing, though. Look, Russia started this invasion, started this war. Ukraine has absolutely every single right to strike within Russian territory. And it's going to send the message to Russia that as long as it continues this war, it's going to have to pay the price. They've already lost about half of their military equipment. They have about 100,000 casualties. And the question for Vladimir Putin and for the Russian people is, how long are they willing to keep up this war when it's become quite clear they're not going to win, they're not going to take over Kyiv, and their losses are going to be astronomical. They're going to continue to rise. And so I think the United States and NATO should do everything we can to continue to equip Ukraine in defending itself. That sends a strong message to every country around the world who's thinking of invading other countries that it's really not worth it.
Gabriel, I found you very straightforward and very open-minded while responding to this question. I wish United States diplomacy or United States State Department would have adopted a similar approach. US, just like many of the developments in the past, is quite reluctant to take explicit responsibility of this attack. I'm not saying that the United States has done it or not done it, but what do you believe can be the reason of having a bit of reluctance in taking the responsibility?
Well, the United States has actually been very reluctant to provide Ukraine with any weapons that have the ability to strike within Russian territory. For a while, they didn't provide the HIMARS weapons because they had long range. So they only provided the short range version of those. Now there's a new weapon called the ATACMS, and they've actually programmed those weapons so that they are unable to fire into Russian territory. So I actually think there's a lot of reluctance from the United States, from NATO, into attacking Russian territory, because most leaders are concerned that it could sort of give incentives and provoke Russia into doing even more drastic attacks. Personally, I think that fear is a little bit misguided. But I think it's strong enough that makes me question that the idea that the United States and NATO would help with these drone developments. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if a country like Iran can develop these long-range drones, I don't think and Iran is not terribly an advanced country. I don't think it's out of the question for Ukraine, which has a long history of military and technological development, to build these drones on their own.
But Mr. Narona, there are many problems associated with it. I mean, Ukraine is in a state of war. It is being showered with rockets, with bombs. The military of Russia is moving in and out. It doesn't have that amount of peace that is generally required to develop a weapon, to do research and development, to test it, and then to send it inside. How can you pull that through in mid of an all-out war on your country?
I mean, they probably led the efforts. Did they have some technical assistance from people in the West? It's certainly likely. It's certainly possible that components of those drones came from U.S. or NATO countries. But I would be a little surprised if the weaponry itself, if the drone itself was produced and sold to Ukraine by Western countries. It just doesn't fit with the other pattern of weapon sales to Ukraine thus far.
But will NATO be happy of the developments that have taken place? I mean, the new development that war has actually went inside the mainland Russia. Will NATO be happy with it?
I think it's NATO is always a little wary whenever conflict gets out of control. But I don't think that these attacks are going to spark a Russian attack against NATO installations. Again, the Russian forces are decimated now. They don't want to start anything with a direct conflict with NATO. Perhaps it means what will likely happen is that Russia will carry out sort of a direct attack against Kyiv, or maybe even out west in Lviv, which is quite close to the Polish border, in retaliation for these attacks. But I don't think there's a massive risk to NATO itself from these attacks. I think also Russia's ammunitions are running quite low. They don't even have the ability to do certain types of attacks out into Western Ukraine at this moment.
And my last question, would it not be very embarrassing for President Putin, because he's now pushed to a corner? Not only that his strategy in Ukraine are not working, but for him, the war that he started outward has started being, hitting the targets inside his country. Is it not pushing Putin to a corner?
Yeah, I think, if you look at Russian nuclear doctrine, they limit the use of nuclear weapons to instances where they say the territorial integrity of Russia is being threatened. I don't think that strikes against Russian territory would trigger that. It's more a land invasion. What concerns me is when they say that Crimea is part of Ukraine, that Luhansk and Donetsk and eastern Ukraine are part of Russia. The implication is that if Ukrainian forces physically crossed into those territories, that the Russians would use that as an excuse and as a pretext to use weapons of mass destruction. I don't think that if an aircraft is blown up near Moscow or a pipeline is blown up, that triggers the same nuclear conditions in the Russian military system and in Putin's mind. Ultimately, I think my concern is over the last year, there's been so many instances where people in the West and the rest of the world say, what might Putin do? How can we make sure Putin doesn't escalate? That's the wrong approach. Putin has escalated every single day of this war. From the moment his troops crossed into Ukrainian territory, they have been escalating. We can't play that game forever. We can't always worry about what Putin will do. Sometimes we just have to defend Ukraine against the war that Russia started.
Thank you very much, Gabriel Nerona, for being guest in our program today. Ladies and gentlemen, the war between Russia and Ukraine is far from over. And with each development taking place against Russia, the stakes are getting higher for the entire world. We need to keep an eye on the developments, and all the nations need to play their part to try to bridge the gap that is taking place between the two sides. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.